Hello everyone. Let's have a look at the Scrum events. Scrum is a combination of practices, roles, and artifacts. The sprint is the most important event in Scrum. Sprints are made up of various other events. The sprint planning, daily scrums, the sprint review, and the sprinter perspective. The sprint is the heart of Scrum. Within a sprint, it's a time-boxed iteration with a maximum duration of 1 to 4 weeks. As a sprint goal, the team decides on a target with the product owner. The sprint backlog is where the team plans their work. When the sprint begins, the team works together to effectively accomplish the planned work and have it ready for review by the end of the time frame. The Scrum team determines the duration of a sprint. Once the team has decided how long a sprint should last, all subsequent sprints should be the same. A sprint can be cancelled before the sprint time box is over. This sprint can only be cancelled by the product owner. On the advice of stakeholders, the development team, the Scrum Master, or the product owner can decide to cancel the sprint. If the sprint goal becomes obsolete, the sprint will be cancelled. This could happen if the company's strategy changes or if market and technological conditions change. Sprints are made up of various other events. The sprint planning, daily scrums, the sprint review, and the sprinter perspective. Sprint planning is the first Scrum event that starts the sprints. The goal of this event is to describe what can be provided during the sprint and how the sprint goal will be achieved. The product backlog is an extremely useful tool when organizing a sprint because it contains a list of ready-to-use user stories that might be included in the sprint. The team should also look at the previous work done in the increment to have a perception on their capacity. The sprint planning is divided into 2 sections. The first section is concerned with what the product owner discusses the sprint's goals, such as what backlog items contribute to that goal, and clarifies any final refinements based on the product's backlog. The development team decides what can be done in the next sprint based on capacity and selects user stories from the sprint backlog. The development team decides how the work will be done, what they will do during the sprint to deliver the sprint goal, how they will divide the work, and how they will implement some high-level design in the second phase. Without the product owner or the development team, sprint planning is impossible. The target is set by the product owner based on the business value he wants to achieve. The development team needs to understand their capability to deliver on that goal. The Scrum Master can assist with sprint planning. The most significant output of the sprint planning meeting is that the team can describe the sprint goal and how they will begin working toward it. This is reflected in the sprint backlog. For each week of sprints, the sprint planning should take no longer than 2 hours. So, for example, the sprint planning meeting for a 2-week sprint would be no longer than 4 hours. Once the Scrum team has defined their sprint goal and their sprint backlog, the sprint can start, and the team will meet every day in the daily scrum. The daily scrum allows the development team to synchronize its activities, evaluate progress toward the sprint goal, and plan for the following 24 hours. The daily scrum is a 15-minute timed event held at the same time and location every day of the sprint. Only the development team is involved in the daily scrum. The product owner and Scrum Master are welcome to attend as observers and facilitators, respectively, to guarantee that the development team attends the meeting. However, the development team oversees conducting the daily scrum, and it is mainly their responsibility to answer the following 3 questions. What I do yesterday to help the development team miss the sprint goal? What will I do today to help the development team meet the sprint goal? And do I see any impediments that prevent me or the development team from meeting the sprint goal? If some team members require further discussion, they can gather immediately following the Daily Scrum. The Daily Scrum improves communication and eliminates the need for further meetings. It's the best opportunity for team to identify their impediments, to highlight and promote quick decision-making. The sprint review takes place at the end of the sprint. The purpose is to collect actionable feedback on the team's work. The stakeholders would be invited to the sprint by the Scrum team. The increment is measured against a sprint goal that the Scrum team has set. The team will present their product work to stakeholders and then get comments on how to improve it. The lessons learned throughout the meeting are included into the product backlog by the product owner. This sprint meeting is limited to no more than an hour per week. As a result, a 2-week sprint would have a 2-hour print review, whereas a 1-week sprint would have a 1-hour sprint review. The Sprint Retrospective is the sprint's final event. This event is timed to a maximum of 3 hours for a 4-week sprint, or 45 minutes every sprint week. The Sprint Retrospective allows the Scrum team to examine and modify the process while also identifying areas for improvement. The Sprint Retrospective's goal is to examine what went well in the previous sprint in terms of people, processes, and tools, identify what didn't go so well in the sprint, and then create a plan for improving the Scrum team's work. Most of its perspectives usually follow these 5 steps. First, get everyone in the right mood by setting a common goal for the retrospective. Second, we need to develop a shared pool of information. 3. Come up with new ideas. Talk about why things happened the way they did. And look for trends. 4. Decide what to do by focusing on a few topics and developing concrete action plans. Finally, clarify how to follow up on these activities to end the retrospective. The backlog refinement is the last meeting we'll talk about in this video. Backlog refinement is not a formal Scrum ceremony, but rather an ongoing activity in which the product owner and development team collaborate on the details of product backlog items that the Scrum team can hold during sprints. Product backlog refinement is the act of clarifying items, adding details, splitting bigger items into smaller ones, adding and discussing new items, estimating or re-estimating items, and ordering these items. The Scrum team decides how and when refinement is done in the product backlog. Refinement typically consumes no more than 10% of the development team's capacity. However, the product owner or the team can update product backlog items at any moment after consulting with the product owner. The backlog refinement ensures that relevant, documented, estimated, and prioritized items remain in the product's backlog. If the backlog is kept up to date, it will save a lot of time in sprint planning sessions.